Alright guys, this is a Onan 4000 generator. It's not running. So a little bit of history with this generator, where it was hard to crank, real hard to get started, prolonged priming, and finally got to the bottom of it. So you'll see, you can just pull this off, okay, and I pulled off the fuel line, and you'll see that when I prime it, okay, when I prime it, no fuel is really coming out. Okay, do this. No fuel's coming out. So the first thing you want to do is, we could hear the fuel pump making noise. Okay, and it's kind of like clicking. So we either have a bad fuel pump, or there's no gas in there to lubricate the pump and it's running dry. So the first thing you're going to want to do in this situation is make sure that you have at least a quarter tank or more of gas. And we're going to come underneath here and look at the fuel line, which is coming out. Okay, what I did was I pulled this off and I blew into the fuel line going back to the tank. I didn't hear any bubbles. So I knew I wasn't getting any kind of prime. I wasn't able to pull fuel. If this line was okay, right, I would be able to blow and essentially have resistance. So disconnect this line and run a auxiliary line into a gas tank. Alright, so I have a gas tank here with some gas in it, and I'm going to put this fuel, I have a separate fuel line right here, and I'm just going to drop this right in, and we're going to see if we can get this thing to fire up. So this comes in, it's going to go in like so. We want to make sure that we get it all the way to the bottom of the gas tank. Alright, so now we're bypassing everything, and we're going to hit the prime button. I'm going to see if we get gas to come out. Doing this one-handed, but bear with me. You can see that the pump. Alright, sorry guys. So you saw that my phone timed out, but you saw that the pump was able to push fuel out, and the pump was also quieter. So we're getting fuel now back into the carburetor. So we're going to make sure that it runs. So we'll hit the prime button for a second, and we'll hit the start button, and we should have it running. Oop. We probably fouled the spark plug because it was probably running lean for a while, so we'll probably have to clean the spark plug. But it's running now, it's going to stay running. We're not going to run this generator with the door off, otherwise the generator will overheat. Alright, so the fuel line runs all the way to the fuel tank of the camper, which is not really easy to see. But it's, now mine, it's behind this axle. Follow me. And if you need to, you could drive your camper up on some blocks so you don't have to be a contortionist. But it's going to, give me a second. I'm a little stuck. All right, so it's gonna plug. I already have mine off, but it's gonna plug right onto the top. You're gonna need a fuel line disconnect. Okay, right there. You're gonna need a fuel line disconnect tool. You can use like a piece of plastic and cut it into like a small circle, and you'll slide up against that groove right there, and that's gonna release the clip and allow it to come off. So you just take a piece of plastic, wrap it around the metal pipe, and slide it to the right while pushing left on the connector, and you should be able to pop that right off. I'll show you what it looks like off. All right, but we're gonna have to run a whole new line. You may be able to get access to yours through the fuel inlet. All right, just to get it popped off. But let me show you what that looks like over here. All right, so we're gonna fast forward. We'll have this out, and what you want to do is have a piece of plastic or a fuel line disconnect, and you're gonna ride the pipe, and it's gonna release this clip. Or you may be able to get a pair of needle nose pliers and pinch these two tabs right here. Okay. But a fuel line disconnect tool is pretty cheap, and you can get them at any auto parts store. In this case, you can see my fuel line, of course, it's gonna be big glare, had a giant crack in it, and as I keep going along and bending the fuel line, there's more small holes in it, and these small holes will make you think that you have a failing fuel pump. Okay, because the pump could overcome most of this until it's a gaping hole like that. So I would be very leery if replacing your fuel pump. What was happening is this was getting really hard to run in hot weather, which makes sense because everything is hotter and this hose is loosening up, and this hole is getting a lot bigger. Cold weather it was fine and the hose would contract. So we're going to reuse this fitting. Okay, and just to let you know, the fuel line for this that connects onto this generator is a 1/4 inch inner diameter. Okay, fuel line. It's 1/4 inch inner diameter, which is about 6 millimeters, and it needs to be rated SAE 30R7, which is what this fuel line is that I took off. You know, just look at your fuel line to double check, but this is, if you read it, is a 30R7 fuel line. So we're gonna pop that fitting off, and I'm actually gonna put a check valve, because this is, I even cut it shorter, but this is about 15 feet, and I have a 30-foot camper, and the fuel can run back into the fuel tank and make it harder for that fuel pump to work. So we're going to put a check valve a little further up over here, and that should reduce the priming time. Let me get this all set up and I'll bring it back. All right, so I added I reused the old fuel line connector, and I'm using an Autiker clamp, but you can reuse the old fuel clamp that came off of the old hose. I had to cut it off, but this is stainless steel. This is good, and this is a one-way check valve. You can see there's an arrow, and it only allows fuel to go one way. So essentially, I don't want the fuel to go back into the fuel tank. I want it to stay in the fuel line, so when you're trying to crank it, it's not constantly pulling back from about 15 to 20 feet. And this should make the system a lot better. If it doesn't work, I'll update the video and I'll eliminate this and just run this connector. But I think this will help. I'm gonna run it a little bit, I'm gonna run it as close to this connection as possible in case I need to cut it out. I'm not wasting a lot of fuel line. And I left this a little bit longer. Yeah, you can see that the connector and the arrow is facing away from the gas tank. So we're going to get this mounted in and we're going to see if we solved our problem. I will not be using the Autiker clamps connecting into the generator, because if I ever want to change the fuel filter or anything like that, or fuel pump, that's not going to be good. But these are lifetime clamps and they're not serviceable. So you may not want to use these, but this is what the factory uses, and as you can see on the Onan Generator, that's what they were using too. Alright? Alright, so let me bring you in and show you what we got here. This is coming from the fuel tank. It's easiest to see it, so I don't have to crawl all the way underneath. So we come in, you see there's an access window right there, and you should be able to see where I connected the fuel line with the connector. Okay, and one thing I noticed with the factory is that they just kind of ran the fuel line anywhere they wanted, and it did a lot of waves just coming from where the axle is. Okay, I ran it, so I get in here right on top of this fuel rail, right on top of the frame, right where you see that zip tie. You see the fresh hose right here? Okay? And it continues, this goes back over the axle to the tank right behind there. I ran on top of the frame rail so it's straight. And I use these big zip ties, and there's already these holes here. And that's where I ran some other lines too, but it's nice and straight, it's the frame. So the fuel pump, once it's primed, you know, you're not working against gravity anymore. It goes all the way down to the zip tie down there. I'm coming, I'm a little slow. Okay, and again, on top of the frame, and move back over, it's on top of the frame. This is an evap line, but this is the fuel line right here on top. So it's on top of the frame. And up and over this cross member. The whole job only takes you about 10 minutes. It's figuring out that you have a hole or a small hole in this fuel line is the problem. And there it is. And then I have some extra, not too much. I come down and around the support. Again, we're working with gravity, and it comes straight in. Let's see if she runs. I will, one disclosure, I did prime the system. It took about a minute, so it should start right up. And we should have power. And we have our microwave on. We have power. So before you go ahead replacing your fuel pump, fuel filter, do some basic tests. Disconnect the fuel line, blow into the tank. Make sure you can hear bubbling and you could establish a siphon. If that works, then your fuel line is probably okay, but I would still use an auxiliary tank and see if the generator will run off of a
2-foot fuel line in a gas tank and see if that solves your problem first, because you probably have a small pinhole in this fuel line. And it took a long time for that fuel line to officially break. So that's what I would do. You know, just break the line, get a 2-foot fresh fuel line into a separate tank, and see if the generator will run and you can get fuel coming out this fuel line going into the carburetor. If you are, then that means your fuel pump is okay and everything else is fine, and this should be able to run indefinitely as long as there's fuel in there just off the system. You don't need the RV tank to run this generator. What else is there? If you're in a bind, you don't need the clip that goes onto the fuel tank. You could just slide this over that nipple on the tank and put a hose clamp in there in the meantime. And in case you don't know, if you have a small line, you can go get at the auto parts store a 1/4-inch barbed fitting on both sides and just splice that in the meantime. I wouldn't recommend it. I would just go buy a whole new fuel line and run the whole thing and eliminate splices and ways for air to come in. I got this fuel line from eBay. Okay, it was only like 35 bucks. It was, and I have leftover, so that's great. Again, the fuel line that came off of mine was 1/4-inch inner diameter, okay, which is about 6 millimeters. And the one on my camper was SAE 30R7 rated, and this is the same one. So that's the fuel line that you're looking for. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm pretty good with these Onan, so I could probably get you back up and running. I pretty much rebuilt this entire generator. They're not too bad to work on.